Hi, Fred. Welcome to Part Maven, Part Maverick. I got to read an early draft of your book that's about to launch, and I'm so happy to have you here. But to kick it off, for anybody, if they don't know who you are and what you do, what would you tell them about why they should listen to our conversation today?
Good question. We are going to talk about the topic of creativity and how what we can learn about creativity from people around the world that could make us even more creative. In the beginning of the book, I have a sentence, and if you better understand the creative process, you can become more creative. That's what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, I think that's super convincing, and also in times where more and more routine tasks are being done by algorithms, creativity on one extreme and analytical rigor on the other are just so important.
Yeah.
When you do something, you clearly have some sort of dissatisfaction or disagreement with the status quo. Otherwise, you wouldn't bother doing it. So, what was your fundamental dissatisfaction or disagreement with the status quo? Why did you write this book, and why do you do what you do?
That's a good question, but I would say I'm not driven by dissatisfaction. I am driven by satisfaction. I wrote this book because I'm inspired by creativity, because I love to travel and I love to meet people. None of that is a dissatisfaction, all of that is satisfaction. So this is not a book written to solve a problem. This is a book to celebrate the wonderful force that is human creativity. It's a positive book.
Yeah, and I think that also comes across in the book. You've traveled extensively across 75 countries and you immerse yourself in the cultures in a very direct way. You were born in Sweden, but you got to see the whole globe. So, what is your origin story? What were these phases and how did you evolve? What were the trigger points, those key moments that you keep with you?
Yeah, if we should search for the dissatisfaction, we can go back way back into my childhood. I was born in a family where creativity was very important. My father was a music teacher and a musician. He could play 10 different instruments. He was super creative. But I was not very gifted in music. So for the longest time, I thought creativity is apparently very important, but I suck at it. And it took me until I was in my mid-20s and until I found something I was good at when it came to creativity, which was the understanding the internet, like trying to figure out what to use the internet for. My first two books were about the internet. And then after that, I realized there are many different kinds of creativity. That's when I became the creativity explorer. For the last 25 years, my full-time job has been to travel around the world and meet creative people. Not because I think I'm the most creative person on the planet, but because I love to meet the most creative people on the planet. That's what I've been doing now for 25 years.
And what were key moments where you go like, oh, okay, this was special, or I gained a special insight here, or things that listeners can be more self-aware about that would help them on their journey,
About creativity itself,
or in
I would
general? I
say
mean,
that the book is 37 different chapters, 37 different countries, and 37 different insights that I had about creativity. Do you have a favorite? You read the book. Do you have a favorite? We're going to talk about the book later, but
yeah,
in 2005, I left Sweden and I moved to China and then to Singapore. I went from having a Swedish perspective of the world to just having a perspective of the world. I went from being a Swedish speaker to just becoming a speaker. I went from speaking in Sweden and Finland and Denmark to speak today I speak in 15, 35 countries per year. And so I got this, I don't like to call it a global mindset because it's not about the globe, a human mindset. You know, the global mindset is like think global, act local. That is, that's business oriented. It has nothing to do with humanity. My slogan is think human, act humane, which I think is a much more powerful slogan.
yeah, I totally agree with you, especially in times now where we're getting a lot more closed down, unfortunately, again, in some ways, or at least that's kind of the narrative.
That
I
is,
think
it's a temporary counter movement. We are going to swing way back, right back to global mindset again. If
yeah.
from that perspective, the human mindset has always been there. It's never been easier to have a human mindset in today's world because of technology. For example, we're sitting here talking to each other. Just 50 years ago, that was extremely privileged if you could do that, and you would do it only on phone. It would cost $12 a minute. Now we do it for free and use video. It's never been easier to have a human mindset, a global mindset, than today. And that means because it's never been easier, so much more people are going to start having it. And when enough people start having it, that's when the real change happens. Now it's a minority. But when the majority start to think like this, then the whole world is going to change.
Yeah, like you say, I think there's so much of this that's not really reversible. Very often it gets blamed, this kind of global perspective gets blamed for problems that have a different
Yeah,
source.
exactly.
And if you fixed it differently, you don't need to blame. This is a good horse you can whip for no reason, right?
Yeah, very true. A lot of local problems get blamed on the global, but more importantly, we also have global problems.
Mhm.
Global problems today than maybe ever before. The only way to solve a global problem is to have a human mindset.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think what I wanted to, before we get deep into the book, I wanted to also understand your process and your journey in writing the book. I get the feeling that this almost covers your entire history so far. You probably didn't just travel 75 countries or speak to the range and the diversity of people just for this book. It almost feels like a memoir where you take all these learnings and pack them together. What was the journey and the process, and what are special moments that you remember on that journey?
Well, I would say it's kind of the opposite. This is more of a snapshot because the book is only 37 countries, but I've been to 75. I go to 15, 20 countries every year. And every time I do, like last week, I was in in Cannes, in Milan, in in Reykjavik, and in all of those three
Mhm.
totally different countries. First one was for lawyers, the second one was for advertising people, and the third was for HR people. So three totally different industries, three totally different countries, and in every one of those locations, I also interviewed creative people that was totally opposite from the people I was speaking to. So when I was speaking to lawyers, I interviewed an artist. When I was speaking to advertising people, I was speaking to an art curator. And when I was interviewing HR people, I was interviewing the head of the local TV station in Iceland. So I get diversity not only in cultures and countries, but also professions and industries. I interview one person a day on average, either on Zoom or in person. That's thousands of people over 25 years. The book is more a tip of the iceberg of things. I've already started writing the world of creativity too. But the publisher said,
Okay, wow.
the publisher said, enough, Fredrik. You know, the book, if you, the book cannot be too thick. So let's stop at 37.
But it really feels like that because each of those anecdotes is pretty special and it's hard to forget. One of my favorites, since you asked, was the one in Ukraine where the car breaks
Ah,
down. All the other guys step out of the car, they're trying to check, how do we get signal on our mobile phone? Where is the tower? And the Ukrainian guy just starts fixing the car. And by the time they realize and come back to the car, he's essentially fixed it. And I'm like, wow, this is
yeah,
epic.
the lesson is a lot of people think creativity is about having ideas. But the most creative person is not the person with the most ideas. The most creative person is the person who has ideas and has the ability to make them happen. In the book, I talk about the eureka moment when you have an idea, but the moment you decide to make that idea happen is the most powerful moment. It's not like, oh, I'm going to write a book. It's, oh, I'm going to write that book. That's a much more powerful moment. We never talk about that moment. In the book, I talk about DQ, the doing quotient. I would not invest in a person with a high intelligence, even not even a high EQ. I'll invest in a person who has a high doing quotient, meaning has the ability to make things happen. And a doer, a maker,
Yeah.
call it whatever you want. These are the people we should celebrate. And actually, these are the people we do celebrate.
Yeah, and definitely this is also the advice you hear from a whole range of people. This is the famous President Obama interview where people ask, yeah, what's your advice to young people? And he says, just be the person that gets shit done. Just do that. It's simple.
No drama,
And
Obama.
I don't
Yeah,
know.
just focus getting it done. And also the 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration is a good quote. It focuses on the hard work of making it done, but the decision to make it done is the most important one. You know, all these things stop people. Oh, I can't do it, or I'm too old, or someone's already done it, or if I do it, they're just going to copy me. You have all these reasons. People have these amazing ideas, and then for whatever reason, they decide not to make that idea happen. So here we have universe creating this marvelous, beautiful idea, but then someone decides, no, I'm not going to do it. That is very sad.
That is so sad and frustrating, which makes me think of some key moments in my work and career where people ask me to build sophisticated forecasting models for a whole range of problems. I would build a model that would far outperform what they had. And then I'd say, okay, now act on it because there is no point knowing that it'll rain in an hour when you step out without an umbrella, right? The whole point is to act on that
Yeah.
information. Just like a trader, if you know exactly how each stock will trade up and down, or even if you know how the index will trade up and down, if you don't place a trade, you will not make money. And I think this is exactly what you're doing, coach. It really doesn't matter what you have in your head. You need to act on it and you need to have the courage to act on it.
And I don't know if this is true, but I've read somewhere that people who work with really old people, like old folks' homes, they say there's two kind of old people. They are the happy ones and the bitter ones. The common denominator between the bitter ones is that they had an idea, sometime in their life, but didn't act on it. Like, I should have asked that woman to divorce her husband and marry me, or I should have quit my job, or I should have done this. And suddenly they're close to death. They realize it's too late now. They get angry and bitter. I don't know if it's true or not. I think it's, I would not be surprised if it's not, if it's true.
I think it's convincing.
And that's what made me go to China in 2005. I had this urge, like, I want to live in Asia. And then suddenly I was over 30 years old and I still hadn't moved. I said, fuck, if I get married and get kids now, I'm never going to do it. And I'm going to resent my wife and children. So I said, I just have to do it. I ended my whole Swedish life and moved to China. And I'm so happy I did. And I said to myself, I can live there for 6 months. And if it doesn't work out, I'll move back. But at least I got it out of my system. So if you have an idea that you feel like, I really need to do this idea, well, hopefully this is the wake up call you need to get that done.
Yeah, that's such a bold moment, and I think you share that in some of your other speeches. I encourage listeners to Google you and look up some of the speeches you've done, because I think those experiences are phenomenal when you go into a new environment. And in fact, this podcast started in this way. I call it part Maven, part Maverick. It's been a bit of my identity, which is, try to be rigorous and serious and well prepared and think through things. But then the maverick part is like, go wild, don't constrain yourself. The creativity here, this thing of, I don't know where it's going to go, but the point is to have the conviction and sort of get going. And when I read your book, I almost think I could rename it part Maven, part Manfred. Can you share what that Manfred story is? That was insane. Especially as a German, I was like, this is such a cool story, and how come it's not more well known? I think this is something that people should know about.
So Manfred is a made up word, just like Maverick. And brand is cows, if I'm not wrong. Manfred is a name of a priest in Germany that had the church right next to the Berlin Wall. And when the Berlin Wall fell, the zeitgeist at the time was like, oh, we have to get rid of this wall. This is a symbol of oppression, and we started hacking down the wall, which was great. But Manfred said we should keep some of it to remind people of, otherwise humanity forgets bad things. And a lot of people were against it because the zeitgeist was, let's get rid of it. But Manfred had this ability to see further, and he was so passionate about it, so he convinced other people that, let's save this part of. So there, when you go to Berlin and you go to that place where the Berlin Wall still is, that's right opposite where Manfred Church was. And because of him, we have that, which is now one of the largest tourist attractions in Berlin. But more importantly, it's such an important place for us to go and remember what was bad with what happened. So to Manfred is to have the ability to see further than what the zeitgeist is at the moment, which is a very specific creative technique, but it's very important because people get sucked up in group mentality and they lose the ability to see clearly and further.
Yeah, 100%. And I think being German, this is something that needs to be celebrated so much more, because the stereotype, there is a bit of that group thing all the time. It's a strength and a weakness sometimes culturally, but the Manfred part is something that, they probably print that on a t-shirt and have
It would be wonderful.
and
It would be wonderful if he got the credit for that. And it doesn't mean it was bad to cut down the wall. Like, that's not the lesson. He didn't want to keep the wall up. He wanted to keep some of it as a memory, thinking 2 steps instead of just thinking 1.
Yeah, I think next time I go and see that bit of the wall or I'm in that area, I'll check out his church too, because I really didn't know this story, and it's such a fantastic story.
Yeah, and they have a nice exhibition in that church where you can see him holding that speech, arguing for why we should keep the wall. There's a video recording. Watch it.
I'll go and check out the church in person. This special moment happened to me when I was working in Berlin once, and I went jogging in the morning, and I ended up in the square where they shot Stauffenberg. And I'd grown up watching these movies, and all of these guys who stood up at towards the end against Hitler and where they were shot. And it was like a moment I just sat down, I closed my eyes, and I felt a special, sort of like, okay, wow, this happened here, and I'll try to get that kind of special moment when I go to Berlin next. So thanks for that. But I think now to really go on this journey of 7 continents of creativity with you, one of the key takes you have is that the lack of framework is deliberate. In some sense, sort of giving up this obsession with let me have a framework is in itself part of your framework. To quote you, you say, the truth is that there is no single truth about how creativity works. There is no one framework that can describe the creative process, because there are so many creative processes as there are people. So But as humans, we crave structure, right? We want some kind of, we want some kind of map, some guide, some kind of thing that we can follow, some recipe. Do you worry that refusing a framework could actually make creativity harder for those who need direction? How do you help people? How do you help people without constraining them? That's the tough question, right?
Yeah. Yes. So the first one is that when you interview a lot of creative people, you realize almost all creativity books have exercises that you need to do. Like follow this and you will become creative. But creative people almost never do creativity exercises. So it's a little bit like it's paint by numbers, thinking that you become a painter by filling out the numbers, a process. But that's not painting. Real painters don't paint by numbers. They create, but that doesn't mean they don't have structure. They have their own structure. The lesson is not that creativity doesn't need structure. The lesson is that there is not one structure that someone else can teach you. You need to find your own. That's why in the book I describe how the creative process works so you better understand it. When you understand it better, you can try to figure out, okay, so if this is how the creative process works, how does it now work for me? So I'm not saying you shouldn't have structure. I say you should not use someone else's structure. You should define your own.
And I think this kind of resonates with what your father used to say about creativity, right? Playing the instrument is the technicalities, but you listen to the masters, you listen to a range of them
Yes.
in classical music, in contemporary, etc., and then you draw your own inspiration, right? It's sort of in that vein, right?
Exactly. He said creativity is not, no, he said to become a musician, it's not about the techniques, it's about the inspiration. Yes, creativity is inspired, but it's what you do with the inspiration that is important. Inspiration doesn't mean, oh, I need to do it like this. That's copying. Like, or I need to do it like that person is doing. It's, oh, look at that. That person, what a wonderful creator. I love what that person is doing. I wonder what I can create. And then you create what you want to do. That's very so. There's a book I once read. It's called. They interviewed 100 authors about the art of writing, and then every chapter is about one author. And there's no way to write a book. One person wakes up in the morning, writes 10 pages, and then whenever that's done, he stops. Another person never writes until he has inspiration. A third person writes 15 minutes at lunch every day. The question is, how do you want to write a book? What is the book you want to write, and how are you going to write it? That is the only question that matters. And now you create your own structure.
And you spoke in another podcast about how there's a lawyer in Denmark
In
who
Sweden,
writes.
he wrote 15 minutes.
Sweden.
He wrote 15 minutes. He had a 45-minute lunch break instead of an hour. He did it every day. I could never do that. I go months,
Same.
don't write for months and months and months. But then I go into writing mode and I write 11 hours a day for 3 or 4 days or a week. And I can write half a book in 2 weeks. I sit on the beach and write. If I don't feel like it, I put the computer away and then I go on down on the beach. Like I'm a sucker for inspiration. I really need it. But some people don't. They're very structured and write 10 pages regardless. Most people have never described their own creative process. If you don't understand your own process and the creative process itself, you're going into the creative ocean in a fog. How are you going to be creative?
Yeah, and I think there's so much self-awareness and also confidence in, okay, everyone's different and my method will be my own. And I had this one writing where I try to see what are other people doing, how do they write, what are their routines, their rituals, their mindsets. And for me, I just keep reading, thinking, stimulating my mind. But then if I try to force myself to write, but it's not like I'm not convinced that what I'm going to write is meaningful. I just can't put it out on paper. It almost feels like it's stuck in my head and it's not coming out. And then when that dam breaks, the whole thing just comes out. I realize that's my process. I whip myself hard sometimes. I say, I want to write 1,000 words today. And I realize it's not ready to come
Yeah.
out. And there's no point trying to get it premature. So I just try to stimulate my mind further to a point where it comes out on its own because there is no point pulling it out.
That doesn't mean you should not study other authors and say, I wonder how they do it. That's what inspiration means. You pick up things from other people, but it's on your own. My creative process is very much like, that's why I travel like a maniac. I travel so much, but I also need to be by myself because I'm an introvert. I need to have both. I can't just sit on an island. I can't just travel. I need to have both. For a lot of people, that sounds super stressful and lonely, but for me, it's perfect. When I realized that, not only did my creativity get a boost, my quality of life also got a boost. Living a creative life raises your quality of life. You solve your problems, or you decorate your house and it's more beautiful. The act of decorating the house itself makes you happy because you're having fun and creating something versus living in a shitty house and doing nothing.
I think the word here is uniqueness, is you do what works for
Hmm.
you. And that's why it's so difficult. I think you probably also had this, but like when people ask for advice, which is also very strange, like now I'm kind of 33. So people like right out of high school or in college go like, oh, what would you do if you were in my place? And I said, yeah, I can tell you what I would do, but whether that's the right thing for you is another matter. It's all about you at the end. Like you said, there are as many creative ways as there are people in the world. And that's so.
I wrote that recently somewhere. I said, people come to me and say, oh, it looks like your lifestyle is so free. I said, it's not about freedom. It's about authenticity. If you're living an authentic life, then you feel free. But authenticity is.
100%. This is now being echoed even in the economics profession. I've had so many people and Chicago school trained people saying, yeah, we went completely off with this neoliberalism, like, oh, we want freedom at all costs, because that's not a North Star, And I think that is now, she's just seeing these new realizations of having gone in a certain direction and then people slowly realizing it wasn't the smart thing to do. But to move on, I think you say curiosity feeds creativity. And I think this is something that I personally try to live by as much as possible and really have skin in the game and not just speak about it. Can curiosity also be a trap? Because this is something that I wrestle with when I sit on the couch and reflect. Am I being endlessly distracted in some ways? Am I exploring too much without really producing enough? How do you balance creativity with focus? Both are important, right? Everyone will tell you focus is good, everyone will tell you creativity is good, but there is this trade off. How do you live with that trade off, that gray zone?
Good question.
What's your
Okay,
experience
but
and
good
take?
question. But you switched in the beginning. You talked about curiosity, and then you switched to creativity. So there's different, right? For curiosity and focus.
Mhm.
If you're always going out looking for new things, then how can you focus on what you're doing? But creativity is the whole process, right? It's about being
True.
inspired, being curious, but it's also about deciding, you know what, now I'm going to stop. In the book, I mentioned that there's a inspiration literally means to breathe in. But if you're constantly breathe in, you're actually going to die. You also need to breathe out. And the act of creating something is to breathe out. Now you're putting something into the world. So you need to balance. If you feel like you're being too inspired, say, okay, that's why half of the year I travel and half of the year I sit on the island and write. I breathe in and I breathe out. Um, Curiosity. I was just in Iceland last week and I learned the Icelandic word for curiosity. It's not in the book, but I'm going to be in the next book. The Icelandic word for curiosity is forviten. And for means before and viten means to know. So in Icelandic,
Mhm.
they focus on the idea that curiosity leads to knowledge. So think about it. Any student, if they are not curious, as in if they don't want to learn, no knowledge is going to stuck unless you beat it into people. But if you're curious about something,
Which you can't.
yeah, and then, not even then. But if you're curious about something, you want to learn. To learn anything, you first need to be curious. But of course, you can't just be curious or just be learning. To be creative is to do something with what you've learned or what you were inspired by. And creativity is the process of being curious, being inspired, identifying problems, coming up with ideas on how to solve those problems, and to decide to fix those problems and figure out a way to solve them. It's all of that. It's not some of that, it's all of that. And if you feel you are not creative enough, very often it's about not getting those ideas done.
Mhm.
That doesn't mean you shouldn't focus on getting better ideas. Maybe you're not getting them done because they're not good enough, or maybe you have an idea, but if you're not passionate enough about making that idea happen, maybe idea is telling you that this idea is not the idea you should make. You should wait for a better one. It's like dating. You wait until you find the one, suddenly you're very motivated, and now you go after her. If you didn't go after her, now you're going to regret it as an old man. But going after her, now the energy is so strong. But
Exactly.
you go after, you want that date. And that's someone how do I know if I should do the idea or not? Someone tells me that's the wrong question. If you have to ask yourself that question, that idea is not good enough. When you hit the sweet spot, it's like a home run. You just, yeah, that's the one. I'm going to do this one.
Yeah, I think that's been the personal experience too. Given how the world has changed so much in the last decade or decade and a half, especially where so much of our life is spent on devices and on the internet, and how much of the internet is algorithmically driven. What happens very quickly is you think, oh, I see something new. Let me check that out. Let me scroll. I might get something new here. This need for something new, this curiosity, this intrinsic curiosity is structurally manipulated or even manufactured, where you're made to feel, Oh, okay. I'm now suddenly interested in that movie star from a country I've not ever been to, or someone falling off into a swimming pool in some weird way, and I need to know, or someone's cooking a dish with stuff I don't even eat. Like, but this is, I shouldn't stop my creativity. It's actually getting manipulated into distraction. So, like, what are your thoughts on that? You see this?
I think you're right. When I was young, everyone saw the same ads and TV channels. We looked at the same TV programs, and the next day, everyone would talk about. There is a book called The White Man, which is a made-up book about some native person living on an island in the Bahamas or something that's brought to Europe in the 1800s, and then he goes back and tell the people what Europe is like. And for in his and he says a newspaper is something that comes out in the morning so everyone knows what they're going to think. Historically, we were more taught the same idea. Everyone talked about the same news, and because we saw the same program, we talked about that. Now that has shifted, and people live in different filter bubbles. We have very few things in common, common experience around, and that is good or bad. But I think it's good to be aware of this because, of course, the algorithm is going to trick you, but you're not a slave under the algorithm. Like, for example, you can you can decide who you befriend on Facebook. Like, I like to ask people, how many different languages do you see posts from in your Facebook feed? If you only see posts in your own language, you have limited your friend. You could go out and get some friends that are posting in different languages. They translate for you now, because I have a bunch of Facebook friends in Sri Lanka or in Bangladesh, and they will write differently about the world news than what we do in Sweden. It's great to see those comments. Travel. I watch Fox News and CNN. If something happens, I want to see how both of them describe it. And I watch Swedish news. And if something happens, like I like to say, when the tsunami happened, where did you read about the tsunami? Did you go to your local newspaper or did you go to the Sri Lankan newspaper? Because most likely they had better clue what was happening. And there are English newspapers anywhere in the world. I encourage people, if something happens in the world, go to the local English-speaking newspaper and see how they describe it. At least at also. It's great. It gives you different perspective. Perspective is a beautiful word.
Yeah, totally agree. In fact, on the Fox News CNN thing, I go and even listen to Tucker Carlson, right? Like, I want to get, like, I listen to AOC, I listen to Zoran Mamdani, I go and listen. So
Yeah.
I think that you first collect that information, you get yourself a spectrum of views, and then you start thinking about, okay, what's my take, or how do I weave it into my worldview? And I think that is so cool.
And in the book, I talk
And
about perspective, which I think is a beautiful concept. Perspective is what happens. So perspective is you have a view of something. But perspective is when you have a view of something from both sides. The classic example is parent and child. So every person who is born have a perspective of what it means to be a child because we were children. But as soon as you become a parent, now you suddenly have a perspective on parenting, because now you know how it is to be a child, but you also know how it is to be a parent. And you totally change your understanding of parenting when you have both. If someone works in an advertising agency their whole life, they have the perspective of advertising. But if you have worked in an advertising agency and in a marketing department buying services from an advertising agency, now you have perspective. You've seen things from both sides, and that is such an advantage. If you've been both in sales and in procurement, you understand buying and selling in a way that a seller will never understand. I like to challenge people and say, what kind of perspective do you have? Well, like, I'm a speaker. In the book I mentioned I'm a speaker. I've done 2,000 speeches. But then I was asked to organize a conference. My understanding of speakers and conferences became so much more profound. Now I had to deal with all the speakers who didn't send out their slides in time and everything. And oh, that's why they ask for the slides. This is so annoying. So perspective is something we should aim for more often.
in fact, a funny personal anecdote here, at a conversation with my mother a while back. She was reminiscing on her childhood and how you had a lot more hierarchy like a generation ago towards parents. You were told what, more or less, a lot of things were told, and you have to do it this way and all of that. And now it's completely reversed. I tell her sometimes, you're my friend, you're like a guide, you share your experiences, but I'm going to make decisions the way I want to make them. And if that means I'll get hurt, so be it. Like, I don't want to get the decision right. I want to learn by doing it. And so she was saying, this is interesting because I was in that middle generation where I kind of had the old school experience as a child. And now as a parent, I'm having a completely different experience,
Exactly.
even from this perspective,
Yes.
right?
And we also have this idea that the whole idea with this book is to describe how people look at creativity around the world. It doesn't mean the way you look at it is wrong. It just means there are other ways of looking at it. And when you realize there are different ways of approaching creativity, then your understanding of it expands. I'm married to a Filipino, so in the Philippines, they raise children differently than we do in Sweden. And because we now have a Swede and a Filipino as parents, we now have to argue, not fight, but we have to make arguments for which way to parent. Sometimes we choose the Swedish way, sometimes the Filipino way, which is better than automatically assuming we should raise kids the Swedish way.
Yeah, 100%. And I think this really shines through your book, the amount of interesting words and concepts you get from different languages and culture, and the context, in a good way, the baggage those words bring. Just as a quick sort of sparkle stuff a bit, but what are two or three, like perspective, I think was from Brussels, but like what are two or three words that, like your favorite ones that you think everyone should know? What's the words, the culture, the etymology, and the context, and good ways, the baggage it brings and that you can use in life?
Well, okay, I will answer that question. But first, I would like to answer because we were talking about curiosity, and I told you the Icelandic version. And I like
Yeah.
because that the Icelandic version, what that which comes before knowledge, which gives you a different view on curiosity. But the English word for curiosity is curious, which comes from cura, which means to care, which means that which you care about is something you will be curious about, which gives you a different understanding of what curiosity is. In Swedish, it's nyfiken. And nyfiken, ny means new, fiken means like a hunger. So it's a hunger for the new. In Bulgarian, it's called laputen, which means the love of asking questions. Each of these words means curious, but from a different angle. It's about asking questions, wanting to find out about the new, caring about things, and wanting to get knowledge. Now you have a more profound understanding of curiosity. I do introduce a lot of words in the book because sometimes there are parts of the creative process that doesn't have a word, and then we need to invent one so we can talk about it. One of my favorites is the mierda moment, which mierda means shit in Spanish. And that moment is when you fail in a way that doesn't make you depressed or sad, but instead get you energized and get you all powered up and say, oh, now I need to figure out how to solve that, which came from a glass artist, which I feature in the book. And so the lesson here is that when we fail, we don't get pulled down, we don't lose energy, we actually gain energy. That's the mierda moment. And when that happens to you, if that happens to you, if you're aware that that's what's happening to you right now, you will take better advantage of it because it will only last for a while. And it's like, no, what the hell? And basically like, what shit? Like, shit, what just happened? I need to figure it out. And it's like a computer game. You get a turbo booster button, but after a while it will be gone again. So you better press it and you better use that turbo button because that might lead you to your biggest creative breakthrough.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting perspective, and it leads to your idea of making things happen, right? The doing
Yeah.
quotient. What led you to sort of conceiving it or even defining that way? And how do you recommend people thinking about the most dangerous trade-off, I would say, in creativity that I try to reflect on, which is overthinking versus precipitation, right? Like you know, okay, I want to think things through, but you don't want to overthink them. You don't want to be like, this bias of action thing. You see that a lot in business context, and people sometimes just do stupid shit where I say, can you just take 2 minutes and think it through first? Like, it's not going to kill you. What are your experiences and your take on this
I
trade-off?
was just on a phone call yesterday with this guy in Singapore, and he's redoing his website, and he was asking ChatGPT about branding and positioning and trying to understand. He was like brainstorming with ChatGPT, and finally ChatGPT said, "Nishant, I think it's time for you to start doing your website now and start trying. You've done too much research when ChatGPT tells you to stop." But I mean, in the book, I talk about profound patient. I talk about this painter in Afghanistan who takes weeks and months to do a painting because she says that the act of doing it slowly makes the painting better because she has time to think about it. The first idea is usually not the best. By prolonging the painting process, she ends up with a better painting, which is kind of in the book. I put that as a balance to this Western concept of go fast and break things or pivot and do things fast. In the West, we focus very much on innovation as being fast, and nothing wrong with that. It could be and it should be, but it could also sometimes take the longest time. I think we should not be afraid to take longer to create something as well. And again, there's no right and wrong. It's whatever feels authentically right for you is what you should do.
Yeah, in a specific context. And I think that painter story, what stood out was you said she would collect some emeralds, grind them, go and find a cat, and then find the hair on the
Yeah, she
neck so
makes
the
her own
paintbrush.
paint. She makes her own paper and paint. In etymology point of view, procrastinate means to postpone to tomorrow. Procrastination in itself is not a bad thing. It's only when it makes you feel bad that it's a bad thing. If you're putting something off tomorrow, even though you know you should be doing it today, then you are procrastinating. If you're putting something off tomorrow because you feel it needs to be left for tomorrow, it's not a bad thing. I have raspberries on my island. If I look at the raspberry and say, oh, it's almost done, and then I said I should leave it to tomorrow, that's not a bad procrastination. It's good. The raspberry needed one more day to become sweet. If you pick it, my kids go and they pick it right away. It's like, I want to eat it now. I said, no, don't eat it now. It's going to be way yummier tomorrow. So procrastination is not a bad thing. It's only bad if it makes you feel bad.
Yeah, it's this deferred experience of something nice. Like you say, it's not always a bad thing. Grew up with this German children's rhyme, which was Morgen, morgen, nicht nur heute, sagen alle faule Leute. So tomorrow is what the lazy people say. And it's true for things that you could do today, but like you said, don't pluck that raspberry until it's ripe.
Yeah.
This brings to mind one thing in the tradition of Indian classical music, which is that the student trying to become a master musician would be locked up, I think it was about a month thing, in their rooms, just sleep and practice. The food was brought and from under the door, almost like a prison, right? So you're in solitary confinement, just playing music for a whole month. And when you step out from that, you probably go through some kind of experience doing that intense thing that changes you fundamentally as a
Mm.
person. It made me think about the Afghan painter you described. I think a lot of Native American tribes had similar initiation ceremonies into adulthood or other stuff. And I think this idea that creativity is not about just, there's a lot of discipline and structure also to creativity. So would you like to sort of unpack that a bit?
Yes, I think it's very important to understand that creativity is, I wouldn't call it structure, I'd call it process, which is,
Hmm.
I like the German example in the book. I was interviewing this young German, he was studying to become a brewmaster. And then he said there are two kinds of people who have applied to this brewery school, and half of the students, they apply because they love drinking beer, and half because they love making beer. They like chemistry and stuff like that. After 1 year, half of the students has quit. And it was all the people who love drinking beer, because suddenly they're stuck with this boring assignment. It's like, I don't care about this. I just want to drink the beer. And this is true. So if you want to become good at something creatively, choose the thing where you really like the process of making that. And that I do the analogy when people come to me and say they want to become speakers and say, oh, I love giving speeches. I love the energy when people, when I'm on the stage. I said, well, okay, good luck. You're not most likely going to end up being a good speaker. And the ones that end up being good speakers are the ones that say, oh, I love the process of, writing a speech and watching myself on speeches that I have recorded and just trying to become, get the perfect word to say. Those are the ones who becomes great speakers, the ones that love the process. And there's an interview in the book about a Malaysian musician. He's been a musician for over 40 years, but he calls himself a student of music, which I think is brilliant. And that's like, I'm never done. I'm still a student after 40 years. I'm still learning how to do this. I still want to understand what music is. And then you're in love with the process. You're in love of learning and understanding.
Yeah, there's also this idea along with producing stuff to get inspired, take the work of others. And you introduce this idea of evoking. When you're taking in stuff, don't consume it, but try to evoke it. What is that realization about how someone can live this evoking approach? I found that very profound,
Yeah.
and I'm still wrestling with what that means and how to live it. But what has been your experience on this idea of evoking versus
Yeah,
consuming?
so the head of the creative industries in Bhutan taught me this. And he's a wonderful guy. And he was so passionate other people's creative work. So, I mean, in the book, I talk about, we say we consume content, but consume literally means to ruin something. Like the fire consumes the house, and now the house is gone. It's not a positive word. If we are just looking at creative work as consumption, we are not getting anything out of it. But there are two ways to consume creative content. One is to turn on music and or look at a TV show and read a book just because you're bored. But if you are like, if you're a writer and you read a book, You are reading that because you want to understand how this person wrote the book, and you're fascinated about the concept, and you're like, oh, I love the way they use words, and you get energized by that. So, or if you just say, oh, I feel sad, I need to be cheered up, and you go to Spotify and you search for music that makes you happy. Now you're actively choosing how other people's creative content is going to affect you. That's a different word than just consume. So now you're evoking some kind of emotion in you. If you're just sloppily consuming content, you get nothing. I call it empty calories, like fast food. You don't get anything out of it. But if you consciously decide what a kind of a creative you're going to put into yourself and say, I'm going to put healthy calories into myself, I'm going to make sure I get the most out of that. It's almost not the same thing to call that empty listening to, lazy listening to music or something. It's part of the creative process.
Yeah, I think this nutrition perspective is so enlightening because it helps answer this other thing we spoke about, right? When is the algorithm feeding you, and when are you taking advantage of the algorithm? Think of whatever content you have in front of you, and you split it into consuming slash evoking. Think of it like fast food and sugar and carbs, or protein and fiber. You ask yourself, am I just binging on fast food, or am I eating something healthy? And if you ask yourself that question every time you scroll, every time you click on something, just at 2 seconds of which of these two categories is it, and just that sense of awareness, I think, will help you step up above the algorithm, where the algorithm does not control you, but then you get to ride the algorithm in the direction you
Exactly.
want.
So I give you a very concrete example. Sometimes you are in a mood like, I just want to laugh, right? My wife also like, just watch something, before kids are asleep and make us laugh. Now there's two options. I could either go and watch a sitcom, or I could watch stand-up
Hmm.
comedy. If I watch a sitcom, I'm
Hmm.
going to laugh. If I watch stand-up comedy, but if I watch stand-up comedy, I'm also going to learn how to deliver something on stage with stage presence, delivery, all of those things. So I end up choosing very often, consciously, okay, let's watch stand-up. And now I'm learning how to become a better speaker. At the same time, I'm laughing, having fun, enjoying myself. But that's not consuming content to me. That is evoking inspiration while having a
Yeah,
good
no,
time.
totally. I think that's the framework, the useful takeaway when dealing with this flood of stuff out there. This leads to the next thing, which is you speak about embracing paradoxes. So you say avoid this one size fits all thing, right? If so, you basically argue there are as many creative approaches as there are people on the planet, and if every creative process is unique, what can we generalize about creativity? Everything is unique and it's true. At the same time, it's also true that you need to have some way to abstract out what is generalizable and usable. How do you wrestle with that?
Well, for example, some people say that, oh, I need to be by myself to have ideas. I need to meditate. A lot of ideas come to me when I'm meditating. And some people say, oh no, let's brainstorm. Let's get a bunch to get people together, share ideas. Come. Like, so which one is it? Are you supposed to be alone? Or are you supposed to be with others? No, the answer is both, right? And if you start, a paradox is not the right word, maybe. It's a multitude. It's all true. And back to what we talked about earlier, if is there any other way to look at it, it's opposite to what I'm seeing. For example, in America, shoot for the stars, go to the moon, make something that's never been done before. Japan, kaizen, small improvements all the time, make something slightly better. These are almost opposite approaches to creativity, but they're both powerful. If you're only aware of one, you have one tool. If you're aware of both, you now have two tools and understand that there are different ways of doing it. So now you're going to look for a third tool or a fourth tool. That's where it becomes powerful. The whole idea with this book again is to show you there's so many different tools, ways of looking at creativities. Get to understand more of them, and your understanding will blossom.
I think what you just said made me think about when you have 2 points, so like the think big, aim for the stars, and the Kaizen approach. It's just like you have two tools now. You know that there is a spectrum between these two. So it's a continuum that you have unlocked. And when you add a third thing, it's not just three tools, but three spectra, three sets of continuum, etc. So you have this n factorial explosion of spectrum. The more aware you are of that, the more you can find your place, your sweet spot in that high dimensional space.
Yeah, and you'd be much more curious because now you realize that there are not three colors. There's like there unlimited number of colors, and now you can, oh wow, I wonder if there's a different kind of purple here. So yes, I think spectrum is a very good way of describing it, and
And
it is an infinite spectrum too.
yeah, definitely. And I think the other thing that really touched me was you speak about how it's not just an external spectrum. You say creativity is understanding yourself.
I
So you're
actually,
suggesting that,
I didn't say that. One person I interviewed said that was also Bhutan, of
okay,
tourism in Bhutan. He said, you Westerners, you talk about creative expression, solving the problems of the world. It's all outward. He said, creativity is not outward, it's inward. Creativity is about understanding yourself. If you think about anything really creative that you've done, you learn something about yourself by doing that. If you didn't learn anything about yourself, was it even creative? Or were you just doing it because someone paid you? That's like advertising people who want to be artists, but they're doing ads to get paid and they feel like prostitutes, basically. That's what it is. If to be creative without the understand and learning something about yourself is prostitution. Like you're doing it for someone else, not for yourself. If creativity is understanding yourself, learning more about yourself, you cannot fail. Even if you're a painter and you start painting a painting, at the end you have an ugly painting, but you learn something about the creative process and about yourself while painting that. Who cares? The painting, just put it away, or you burn it, or whatever you want to do with it. But you did learn something about yourself, so you didn't fail. So the creative process is positive. Creativity is such a powerful thing. We call it creativity. It's the same word we use for God, creator, the birth of everything. So creativity is like, I liked in the book I mentioned a quote from Johann Stahl von Holstein. It's the second most powerful human emotion after love. Love changes us, but just underneath is creativity. It's such a powerful thing that so if we use creativity, that powerful force, to better understand ourselves, we truly will understand who we really are, and not what someone else told us to be.
I remember the person had creativity, and the top thing they asked you, what's the most important thing? And you said love, and you realized very quickly that they actually wanted, it was a rhetorical question. And then so you said, okay, what do you think is the second most
Of course,
important thing? And then now what's
love beats
creativity?
everything, but creativity.
And I think this is something one has to remind oneself, because we're in a results driven world, like get stuff done. What progress have you made, explicitly measurable progress? In those moments, to say you don't have to justify directly what creativity produces, especially in terms of explicit or tangible outcomes. Sometimes it's that marination taking place in your head, and then it comes out at one shot. You can't have a baby evolve outside the womb. It's going to be inside, and then when it comes out, it's magic. And I think there's a bit of that.
Yeah, but a lot of the chapters are about understanding what kind of ideas are you really pursuing. Are you pursuing those shallow ideas that you do?
Mhm.
Are you pursuing what I call in the book divine ideas? Ideas that are beautiful and come to you, feel like gifts from the universe. And are you pursuing those kind of ideas which will make the world more beautiful and your life more wonderful as well? Those ideas are very different from those artificial shallow ideas that he calls mortal ideas.
Yeah, definitely. There is one thing that really shocked me, but in a good way. You actually traveled and seen all these places. You speak about this idea of collective creativity when you went to North Korea. There aren't that many people in the world that have gone to North Korea. And it's a contrarian perspective. And chapeau for that, because to find creativity in a country that gets spoken about, especially at least in Western media, in a very different way. For me, creativity was always a deeply personal, a journey of self-discovery. You speak about collective creativity, and how does one wrap one's head around this? What was your experience, and like what is collective creativity?
Yeah, and that's a great example of the paradox of creativity. Creativity is an inward journey trying to understand who you authentically are, just like we talked about earlier. But at the same time, the insight that came from North Korea is that creativity is not about you. It's not an individual skill, it's something that we create together. I went to North Korea because it is a very uncreative country and a very, very oppressive regime. I wanted to see if there's something I can learn about creativity even by going there. It's like if you want to study plants, you want to go to a really barren place and say, can I learn something about plants in a barren place? So I went there because it was an uncreative environment. But I did get a profound understanding of how the culture of North Korea looks at creativity. And they look at it as a collective skill. So, like how you and I look at communication, like I can't communicate by myself, there has to be two people. And they look at creativity like this. It's something we do together collectively. And in the book, I mentioned how Taylor Swift gave $100,000 to every truck driver on her latest tour because she realizes that without the truck drivers, there will be no Taylor Swift tour. But in the West, we're so focused on that creative star, we don't even see the musicians. And we definitely don't see the people selling the merchandise and driving the trucks. Creative person knows that even the most individual of skills, a painter, will need help because someone taught that person to paint, someone made that paintbrush, someone made the paint, and someone inspired you to want to become a painter once. So and when we realize that creativity is humans sharing experiences and inspiring each other, it becomes a collective activity. Then we look at creativity differently.
And I'm so grateful you went to North Korea and had that epiphany because I haven't traveled that much around the world, even though I'm sort of embedded in multiple cultures. I haven't seen the world as extensively as you have, but reading your book, I got to travel the world through your perspective. That was very enriching and inspiring. It makes me want to travel the world more extensively.
That's because that is definitely a purpose of writing this book. So I would like to ask you a question now. If you in 30 seconds or 45 seconds would describe the effect that the book had on you, how would you describe it?
I think the book made me focus on the concept of creativity, see it from multiple perspectives. Take one word, creativity, and do a deep and rich marination of that concept and really go end to end, like marinate and then grill it and then you eat it. It's the whole journey, right? So it's like this multi-dimensional journey where the marination itself is very rich and the grilling has its own process. You come out richer on the other side. I don't think that many people who've traveled so extensively and reflected as extensively as what you've done. And I think that that's something that really enriched me. And that's something I would want to go back to once in a while. So I'm not saying this is something you read cover to cover multiple times, but you read it more or less cover to cover the first time. If there are parts that don't trigger you, you can skip them. You can come back and reread the part that inspired you. You can also try to reread the parts where you go like, oh, okay, this didn't click, but now it clicks. It's just such a rich book in so many ways, and I think that is amazing. And your cover is also something that triggered me because my first book cover was just the title and my name. And that was my minimalism. It's not because I didn't want to be creative, it's just that when I'm unsure and less confident to do something, I just go mad minimalist. But now for the second book, that has really sort of triggered me to think, oh, let's sweat, right? Let's be bold. Let's push the limits. Because going minimalist is my natural response, right? When in doubt, go minimalist. And so I think that way it's really profoundly, both as a reader but also as a writer, trying to continue on their own creative process, to push the limits a bit and be like, what'll go wrong? You can always go minimalist anyway. That's the default state.
Yes, and
Yes.
I think if you write a book about creativity, you should try to do something creative in the book itself by putting the table of content on the cover, which I'm sure I'm not the first person to do, but it's rare. It really enhances the idea of a book cover. So you get understanding of the book is about. People are now more and more buying things online. It's not the same. You can flip through it on the same kind of a thing. So at least you just see the cover and get a sense of what the book is about.
Definitely. And the favorite authors and the ones I really admire and look up to are the ones that eat their own dogs. When it was you with creativity, there's another book called Just Evil Enough on subversive thinking for growth strategies for companies. And that book was itself so subversive in its structure, the way it was, marketed. And so I think that really brings that authenticity across. There's another thing I wanted to riff on before we wrap up. You speak about this notion of privilege, and I think this is something everyone wrestles with in different ways, and everyone is privileged in different ways too. And let me quote you. You say, for me, it was important to explore all kinds of places. I think what you mean is also places like North Korea, which most people wouldn't have thought of writing about. So you say, to feature only successful creative professionals from my own Western cultural bubble would have been safe and easy, but it would also have been wrong. Privilege is tricky, but ignorance is worse. And later on, you say not going would have been a worse use of privilege. And I totally resonate with that. And you've traveled these 75 plus countries for creative insights, and that richness comes across. But if I were to wrap that up into a counterintuitive lesson, what have you learned beyond the typical Eastern Western cliches? And this is quite common. People like, oh, the West thinks like this and the East thinks like this, which I feel is just a horrible cliche or a horrible way to club things together. What is one counterintuitive insight you took away from this?
I agree with you because I'm very much making sure that I do the analogy with food. If I write a book about food and I would go to Japan and I would write a chapter about sushi, it doesn't mean that every Japanese person always eats sushi. It also, they eat hamburgers and an American would eat sushi. So it's not about this culture does things this way. It's the book is not, it's not about that. The book is something I learned about creativity by going to a specific country or culture, which triggered something in me. Can you repeat the question again? There was something else I wanted to add.
Yeah, of course. There are these cliches, but you've seen such a range, the entire spectrum. What's the counterintuitive lesson you took away about creativity beyond these extremes?
First of all, for the first 10, 15 years of my career, I would only interview successful business people or artists about creativity. I became the creativity explorer. Now I interview all kinds of people. There's a chapter about what I learned about creativity from the girls in the slums of Mumbai. They gave me a very profound insight about creativity. The lesson is that you can learn something from anyone. Even if that person is less knowledgeable about the concept, I know more about creativity than the girls in the slums of Mumbai. Yet they taught me something about creativity that I didn't know. So that made me even more committed to interview all kinds of people, not just a specific kind of person. Because when you do that, all professions, all countries, all cultures, all level of society, all levels of professionalism, you get an understanding of human creativity. My internal slogan is humanity to the power of ideas. I want to understand creativity through humanity. I want to understand humanity through creativity. And then you understand the concept on a much broader scale. When you have that approach to learning, it resonates on a different level.
Yeah, no,
That's why I love the rebranding from creativity expert to creativity explorer. An expert has all the answers, but an explorer, per definition, doesn't have any answers. It's just curious to find out things he or she doesn't know. So that's why I love to explore creativity.
yeah, and I think there's this one quote which I've been trying to remind myself every day, which is remain curious, do not fall into knowingness. That really comes across in the book. And I think it also shows your skill and the ability to talk to everyone because not everyone can do that. When I see among the people I know, very few can speak to the president and then speak to the homeless person on the street. And with that same sense of authentic bonding, not everyone can do that. And honing that skill by speaking to people outside your bubble, I think would already enrich you. The process of doing it is valuable.
I agree with you, though. I think everyone can do that. Everyone can
But it's not
learn to do
natural.
that. It might help me that I have an identical twin brother. So when I was growing up, I had someone who was exactly like me. And when you have someone exactly like you, literally, I mean, DNA, on DNA level, exactly the same as you, but it's still not you, you get a different sense of equality and fairness. That might help me talk to all kinds of people because I look at them as very similar to me.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. And everyone can do that. I totally agree with you. But it doesn't come naturally, is what I'm
Yes,
saying. Some people have to put in more effort, right?
do.
But now to wrap up with one of the words I found very interesting and I think relevant, which is, and I'll try to pronounce it correctly, which is tetelestai, which is Albanian. And the concept there is knowing when to stop, right? So
Good to end with that.
exactly. I really wanted to wrap up with that because I think it's an interesting concept. And I think in a world where we have increasingly more compute, more data, and now with a lot of infrastructure investments in that, and this mad obsession, and essentially AI being anything like any generative model being called AI, the ability to generate, to ask, to prompt, to do something is just like you can keep doing it. Like the guy who's trying to build his website and kept prompting. There comes this moment where you need to have the judgment to say, now I stop, because the cost of querying is essentially, it's not zero, but it's cheap. And you don't realize that it's the opportunity cost of not doing something else that really
Yeah.
matters. It's not the explicit cost. This idea is very important. Do you think that judgment around when to stop is a key pillar of human creativity? This is what makes us really human in many ways.
I think what you were describing, like I need to stop doing research, I need to start doing it. That's more the Tekanomon. That's more about getting started. But what you were describing, the Albanian example, that's when it's time to know that this specific creative project is done. So, for example, the guy in the book makes mosaics, big ones, like 500,000 nails, and then he creates a picture of Picasso using nails. And he was, because everyone knows when we start, so, oh, I have an idea, I'm going to make it. But how do you know when you're done? How do you know if it's 499,999 nails or 500,000 nails or 501,001 nails? But he said the art piece talks back to him and says, one more screw, one more screw. Oh, you're done. Like, don't put another screw in. And then he listens to that. And you go, oh yeah, okay, I'm done. Putting away the screwdriver. It's kind of like this podcast. You ask question after question, and you know what? I think that was my last question. I think we're done. It feels good. When you're writing a book, you edit, you edit, you edit, you edit, and you go, you know what? I'm done. I don't need to change anything. You look at a sentence, you rewrite it, and you look at this and oh, there it is. The sentence is done. Don't touch anything. And that is so important, to be aware of that, to listen to that and say, yeah, so you don't continue. Because a lot of beginner painters said, I was actually doing a pottery course with my mother. She was turning 80, and we were taught got her to do pottery. And the teacher said exactly this. The biggest mistake beginners do, they start, doing the pottery, and then they have a vase, and then they continue a little bit, and then suddenly it's gone. Yeah, you need to look at it. No, you're done. But it only took 2 minutes. Doesn't matter. It's perfect like this. Don't touch it. And she was like, don't touch it. Don't, you're done. Don't touch it, please. And then, of course, one of my children, just a little bit more. And then it all fell apart. The moment to know when to stop is as important as when to start.
But I think there's no better way to end this, Frederick. This is really that moment. It's one of many. I was so happy to have you on Part Maven, Part Maverick, or Part Manfred, actually. Thank you for producing this book and for knowing when to stop. I'm so glad this book is coming out.
It was a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much.